Hello, everyone. It's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and I'm joined again by Tomer. How you doing today, Tomer?
Hey Seth, how's it going?
It's going well. Excited to spend one more day talking about Commander 2016. So today we are looking at some commons and uncommons. These are cards that we put in their own video because they are found throughout the deck. So these cards show up in at least two Commander decks, and some cards show up in three or even all five of the Commander 2016 decks. So we figured instead of talking about them again and again and again throughout the week with each deck, we would just give them their own video, kind of break down a little bit of what they could mean for Commander, where we're excited to play them, and all that kind of stuff. So, Tomer, are you ready to talk some commons and uncommons from Commander 2016?
Oh, I'm excited. I really like the ones that they printed out this time. They were very thoughtful and they add a lot not only to multiplayer in general, but they really support these pre-constructed decks and they fix a lot of flaws that I had some skepticism going in forward. So, really happy to talk about them.
All right, well, first card, let's get to it. We have Orizaba Advocacy, which is a 1/4 for 3 mana. So, Tomer, what do you think about this card? Where does it fit in Commander?
I think this is an amazing card. I really love it because it really appeals to the politics aspect of multiplayer, which is my favorite part of Commander. I love playing politics, and I love just like this undervalued power level in these cards that are not. It's not raw power, but it's manipulating your opponents is just like an understated power there, and that's what Orzhov Advocacy does. Basically, you're bribing your opponents to not attack you for a turn, and the bribe is here. I'll give your creatures 2+1/+1 counters, and in return, you can't attack me with any of your creatures or any of my. You can't attack me or my planeswalkers with any of your creatures until my next turn. So it's kind of like a pillow fort card. It's like Ghostly Prison or Sphere of Safety, those type of things. Instead of forcing your opponents to pay more mana to attack you to deter attacks, you're giving them something in return. But if they don't accept it, then they don't get +1/+1 counters and they can attack you. But I really like the style of this card. It's very much built-in politics. And as far as where I put it, basically any Pillow Fort type deck or any group hug type deck, I'd like to run it in. But I'm also just run it in other decks with white in them because I really like the political aspect.
Yeah, I also the political aspect is a big deal, and I think you're right about Pillow Fort decks and all that. I also like the potential in maybe some sort of +1/+1 counter deck because it puts counters on one of your creatures as well. It says each player, so this is also just a 3-drop that sits on the battlefield and gives you 2+1/+1 counters, and then maybe you can proliferate them or double
Hmm.
them up in some other manner, doubling season or something. So I think there's a lot of potential with this card, and at 3 mana, it's pretty efficient. So I could definitely imagine playing it in multiple style of decks. But I think Wizards has done a really good job making politics matter, and that's one of the most fun aspects of Commander. So it's nice to see more politics matter cards generate that conversation around the table, kind of make some backdoor deals for your benefit. That's part of what makes Commander such a fun format. So it's exciting to see more of it.
I also like how general this card is. As you pointed out, also +1/+1 decks are going to love it too, because I forgot to mention, yeah, that it also affects your own creatures. So politics, group hug, defensive decks, and +1/+1 counter decks all would like this.
Well, speaking of +1/+1 counter decks and politics, our next card is actually somewhat similar, Evolutionary Escalation. So you get 3+1/+1 counters, but you also have to give your opponent 3+1/+1 counters, all for just 2 mana. What do you think about this one, Tomer?
I think it's a very powerful engine by itself. Getting 3+1/+1 counters on your creatures for 2 mana every single turn repeatedly is really good for the cost. Of course, there is the supposed downside of giving +1/+1 counters to your opponents, but again, it's very, very similar to the Orzhov Advocates that we just saw, where you can use that as a bargaining tool. You can say, if I give you +1/+1 creatures, will you agree to help me out in some way? Help me out could be just don't attack me for a turn, much like Orizaba Advocacy, or it could be like help me attack this other person, a mutual threat of ours. So there's a lot of wheeling and dealing with evolutionary escalation, and I actually like it a lot more than if it just said put 3+1/+1 counters on your own creature and that was it. I like it a lot more that you actually give it to your a potential opponent as well, and use the politics aspect as a bargaining chip.
Yeah, the political aspect is very sweet. Also, even though the card looks symmetrical, it's really not because you are choosing both of the targets. So you can put it on a creature that your opponent might not be attacking with. Maybe it has a pacifism effect on it, so it can't attack. And plus, since you're building your deck with this in mind, you can play Invisible Stalker or another hexproof creature that can really benefit from those counters much more than your opponent's random mana dork can benefit from it, or a creature with Defender your opponent might have. So even beyond the politics, I think you usually get the better end of the deal when it comes to distributing the counters.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think +1/+1 counter decks are going to love this. I personally have been tinkering with a Skullbriar deck, which is basically a Voltron +1/+1 counter deck, where Skullbriar maintains his +1/+1 counters even when he goes back to his command zone. This is going to be a really good engine for that deck and other +1/+1 decks in general. But the political aspect is something I love as well.
All right, next on our list, we have a red card, kind of a crazy one, Frenzied Fugue, which is kind of like a repeatable threaten effect. What do you think about this one, Tomer?
I like that it lets you enchant a permanent. So this could be a creature, or it could be a land, it could be a planeswalker, it could be anything. So it's very flexible. I'm not really sure how effective it is going to be in a typical game, but its flexibility is really, really well noted. Like, if there is no good creature to steal with Frenzied Figure, you could just steal a land if worse comes to worse, maybe like a Karoo or something. I need to see this in play before I hold judgment. It's a really interesting card. It's a very flexible card. I'd like to see how it goes.
Yeah, I'm not super excited for this one, although I think the idea is neat because the way it's worded, you're going to get that permanent every single turn until someone deals with your enchantment. So if you steal a Planeswalker, it's not like you one-shot them with the Zealous Conscripts or something like that. You are getting that every single turn until something happens. Same with creatures, so it seems like there's a lot of repeatable value there. I just don't know exactly where you play this or where it fits. What kind of deck would want that? I'm not sure if it's a card that you just slam in a red deck for value, but if it's not a card you just play for value, I have no idea where it fits because it's a really weird and unique ability. So I think it's cool that it exists, but personally, not at the top of my list for cards that I'm really dying to play with.
Yeah, I don't usually play with threat effects in Commander, but if I did play with a threat effect, it would probably be Frenzied Fugu, just because it is a repeatable effect. It is a flexible one. It doesn't just steal creatures, it steals a permanent. So if I did run this type of effect, it would definitely be this card. But I'm still not sure how it's actually going to play out.
All right, moving on, we have the first of one of the returning mechanics that was kind of all throughout Commander 2016, basic land cycling, treacherous terrain. Oh, this card is so expensive. What do you think, Tomer? Is 8 mana just too much for the treacherous terrain?
Honestly, I don't think so. I think this is a really cool finisher for some decks, especially a more group hug style deck. It could just come out of left field and really ruin your opponent's days. 8 mana is a lot, but I think this type of card, Treacherous Terrain, I think it's a follow-up to group hug ramp cards, like, for example, Collective Voyage. Collective Voyage says each opponent can join forces with you. They can pay mana, and for as much mana that's spent on the card, casting the card, you put that many. Each opponent puts that many lands from their library into the battlefield. So if you do a Collective Voyage for let's say 10, x equals 10, each player is putting in 10 lands directly into play, and if your opponents all have like 15 or so lands, you play Treacherous Terrain, you can immediately kill your off all your opponents in one fell swoop. So it's kind of a sneaky way of group hug decks actually winning the game.
It almost, and this might be a bad comparison, but it's almost the Gruul version of Exsanguinate in that it does a huge amount of
Hmm.
damage to everyone. You don't get to gain the life, but the thing I like about this card and about basic land cycling cards in general is they're almost always better than they look. Even though the expense of the card is high, 8 mana is a lot. There's going to be some games where you're going to have a hard time casting it, take a long time to be able to cast it. You always have the option to just turn it into a basic land. So there's so much flexibility there. And I've learned this with some of the cards we saw in a Lara block where it's this random creature that's like 6 mana and it doesn't look very good, but the fact that you can have it be that creature sometimes but also just be a basic land on turn 2 where you need to fix your mana, it makes it a lot more powerful than the text reads, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's true of the entire basic land cycle. And I think this new set of basic lane cycling is even better than the ones we got originally in Alara block. Just the flexibility here is really, really important for these pre-constructed decks. I was initially very suspicious of maybe the pre-constructed decks having a lot of difficulties just casting their spells on time, because they are 4-color decks and they are kind of restricted on budget. But the land cycling is fantastic. I can see most of the time using land cycling cards like Treacherous Terrain just for their land cycling ability on turn 2 or so. And only when you reach the late game, when you don't really need that fixing anymore and you don't need to hit a land drop anymore, that's when you start using it for its actual ability. You could even double dip by land cycling and then using a regrowth effect to return it back to your hand once it becomes relevant to you. So I really, really like the versatility here. I think basic land cycling costs maybe 1 or 2 more mana for the ability compared to like a card, the same card without land cycling. But I think that versatility is well worth it.
All right, moving on to the next card on our list. More basic land cycling. This time we have a sort of pseudo wheel effect for yourself. What do you think of Ancient Excavation, Tomer?
This is a tough one. It is a wheel effect just for you. It doesn't put you back to 7 cards, so you're more likely, like if you just top deck an Ancient Excavation and you have nothing else in your hand, then this is the worst. I mean, you're gonna just land cycle it, I guess. So it's not the other worst, but it's really interesting because it's instant speed. So I can see certain decks really enjoying this card as a complement to your other traditional wheel effect. If you're drawing a whole bunch of cards and you just want to keep drawing more of them, let's say you're a Nikasaur deck, for example, and you have all the windfall effects, you have all the Wheel of Fortune effects, this is a really good supplement to that because you're always going to have 7 or more cards in your hand. I mean, this is just another way to cycle your hand really quickly and deal a lot more damage at instant speed. And then if you need the land cycling, then it's there as well.
Obviously, there's combos with this. There's some decks that want to force just card drawing is beneficial, like with Underworld connections and things like that. But I think for me, the big deal with this card is the ordering. With wheel effects, usually you have to make this choice where is my hand good enough that I want to keep, or should I trade these in for new cards? With Ancient Excavation, the downside is you're going to end up down a card because Ancient Excavation is going to be out of your hand, so you're going to draw one less card, but you get to draw the cards first. So you're going to go from 6 cards in hand up to 11 cards in hand. Then, yes, you do have to discard, and you're going to be down a card, but you get to choose the best 5 cards out of your entire hand of 11 cards before unlike a wheel effect where you just have to discard everything first. So I really like that aspect of the card. I think your hand is going to end up being better a lot of times after an Ancient Excavation because you have so much choice involved compared to just a straight wheel effect where you're getting 7 random cards.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. It's less like a wheel effect and more like a loot effect, where you get to choose exactly how many cards, like which cards you're going to keep. And that makes it tremendously better once you do have a pretty sizable hand.
All right, next on our list, Migratory Route. Personally, this card does not really do much for me. It's fine. It makes some tokens. I guess if you're a bird deck or a token deck. Am I wrong on this one, Tomer? Is this more exciting than I'm giving it credit for?
I like it. I think making 4/1/1 flyer tokens for 5 mana is pretty much on par. It's cost efficient. I know cards like Secure the Waste, for example, are pretty popular. They're instant speed, and it costs one less mana to make basically that many tokens, but they don't have flying, and that's a kind of neat little thing. And also, if you want to go crazy, like some people I know, and you go bird tribal, then boom, you have another staple for the kanji deck or whatever.
I have played bird tribal in the past. I did not have success with it, but it might be because I didn't have migratory route at my disposal.
Exactly. Maybe you actually stumbled upon your lands and you were like, gosh, I wish I had a basic land cycling card in my opener. You got migratory route.
Really though, I think it's fine, and you're right that it's on curve, but it doesn't jump off the page like some of the other commander cards. Like, wow, this is so cool and exciting and different. This is kind of it makes a bunch of 1/1s, kind of like Lingering Souls or something like that. So I think it's just not that unique of an effect. So that's why I'm not super excited about it. But I agree that it's on curve enough that it's probably playable in bird decks and maybe in token decks too.
Yeah, I think token decks, especially budget token decks that don't have like the best mana base, this is really good. It's mana fixing when you need it. It cycles when you need it, and it makes tokens. So it does the things that you need. And then once you have a better mana base where you just have just more expensive dual lands and stuff like that, and just better mana fixing in general, then you can cut migratory work. But until then, it plays a really good role. Like the basic land cycling is really important.
Moving on our list, we have our common Ash Baron. So we've talked a lot about basic land cycling. This is probably I don't want to say best, but it's the most efficient basic land cycler in Commander 2016. How important is this card to Commander, Tomer?
I think it's awesome. Most basic or like common or uncommon mana fixers that are lands, they usually fix two colors. Like they'll usually come in with two colors, but they always come into play tapped. This one, however, has the option of actually coming into play untapped when you don't need the mana fixing anymore. So it's really good. And then you land cycle for just 1 mana. It's essentially it's essentially like a Terramorphic Expanse if you land cycle it, or it has the option of just coming into play untapped and using it for colorless mana.
Yeah, that was my comparison. Evolving Wilds, Terramorphic Expanse. It's pretty close to a strict upgrade on those cards because you have the flexibility to play it as an untapped source on turn 4, turn 5. Plus, those cards, even though it doesn't say it on the card, it does cost you a mana because it's a land that, regardless of how it's worded, you're going to get a land that comes into play tapped out of it. So it's costing you a mana for a turn anyway, which is the same as Ash Baron. So it's pretty much an upgraded Terramorphic Expanse or Evolving Wilds. And I know from playing Commander Clash, where we have budget restrictions, I have played way more than my share of Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanses, so I expect to play a lot of Ash Barons as well.
Yeah, pretty much any multicolored deck that I've run in Commander Clash or any budget commander I've done runs Terramorphic Expanse and Evolving Wilds. So this is just a slightly better version of it in most decks. You don't have the shuffle ability, but there are some decks that do like you pitching lands directly into your graveyard. For example, the Gitrog monster would love Ash Barons because you get to draw a card and just without even having to use it as a land drop.
And actually, you do still shuffle after you search for the land, so you still get the shuffle effect as well.
Yes, my bad. Yep.
just wanted to make sure that was out there.
So there's no downside. Awesome.
All right, next on our list, one of the more unique cards to come out of Commander 2016, especially for the uncommons, Grip of Pharisis?
Pharisis? I don't know.
Grip of something. You get to make a germ token, steal an equipment. So, Tomer, here's my question for you. Is this card just playable, or do you have to look at your playgroup and say, how many people are playing equipments in my playgroup if you want to put this in your deck?
I think it's the latter. I think it's very specific to your play group. Like, for example, if you know a person likes playing a white-based equipment deck or a red-based equipment deck, then this is going to be such a blowout most often in most games when you see it. However, in a random metagame where you have absolutely no idea what people are playing, it's really a gamble to put Grip of Phyresis in your deck. It's so good at what it does. It's stealing an equipment and immediately equipping it with a germ token. That's amazing, and it's in speed too. So there's a lot of like combat shenanigans you can be doing with this just for 3 mana. But it is very, very selective in what it applies to.
So, Tomer, we both play on Magic Online. You are going to just jam some games with random opponents. Would you consider this or no? It's not that kind of card. You really need to know your playgroup well before you would put this in your deck.
I mean, most play groups, or sorry, most decks are going to be running a couple equipments in general. You're going to see Lightning Greaves a lot. You're going to see Swift Steel Boots a lot. Swift Foot Boots a lot, sorry. And you're also going to see Skull Clamp a lot. So those are 3 equipments that you can pretty much guess every single random commander deck is going to have. So if 3 targets are good enough for Gripper for Restus, I would because just the blow potential is so high. And also, I know, like, in our personal play group, I know, like, Richard runs a lot of janky white decks, so this is a good way to blow him out just for fun. In a random situation, yeah, I'd run it and see how it goes. But I might cut it as well if it doesn't pan out. I think it will do fine, though, in just a general deck.
All right. Well, moving on our list, we have more land cycling, common theme, grave upheaval, reanimation spell, 6 mana gives a creature haste. Tomer, is this exciting? Fine? Good?
It would be exciting in a vacuum. It's fine for what it does. Like, it steals any creature from any graveyard and gives it haste. That's a good ability, and it's okay for 6 mana. However, we're in a format that does run typically Animate Dead and Dance of the Dead, which also steals a creature from any graveyard, and puts an enchantment on it, but it only costs 2 mana. So 2 mana versus 6 mana, you get haste from it, and you're not as vulnerable because if somebody uses an enchantment, there goes your enchantment removal, there goes your creature, there goes your aura. But it's 2 mana, and they're so good. And Grave Upheaval just can't really compare to that, honestly.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same place. You got Reanimate, you have Animate Dead, and once you get up to 5-6 mana, I know the cards aren't exactly the same, but Ever After can get you 2 creatures. You have Unburial Rites, which you can flash back. So I think that the bar is pretty high, and giving the creature haste isn't really enough for me to see the Grave Upheaval getting over that bar for Reanimation. So basic land cycling is nice, and I think that makes this card somewhat playable just because it has basic land cycling. Like I said, the bar is pretty low when you can turn your card into a land and fix your mana for a low cost, but it still doesn't really excite me. I would be surprised if this managed to beat out the other really powerful reanimation effects we have in Commander.
Yeah, absolutely. The common theme is if your deck is multicolored and you don't have the most expensive budget for your mana base, this is a fine card. But once you do upgrade your mana base, then you're going to want to cut Grave Upheaval.
All right, next on our list, we have a removal spell in Parting Thoughts, and I'll let you go first, Tomer. What do you think of this one?
Well, very much like Grip of Phyresis, or however you say it, Parting Thoughts is very selective on how much value you can get out of a target. You're always going to pay 3 mana to destroy target creature at sorcery speed, which is good. It's fine. But the real awesomeness about this card is if you draw a bunch of cards off it. And that really depends if you're killing something with counters on it. And most creatures will not have +1/+1 counters on it in general. But if you're against a deck that focuses on +1/+1 counters, then you're going to draw a whole bunch of cards, and it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, this card, when I first read it, I was like, I don't really like it. Then I realized I love this card if I'm playing a +1/+1 counter theme deck, because you can potentially turn this into a I don't know the best example, but kill my own Hangerback Walker with 5 counters on it, draw a bunch of cards, you get the tokens from Hangerback Walker. So if you're playing a deck, you can turn this into a sack a creature, draw a bunch of cards, or kill one of your opponent's creatures. So that's where I see this card actually being really exciting. If you're playing Doubling Season and trying to put counters on things, this kind of does double duty as a weird black divination that can potentially draw a big handful of cards or kill any threat from your opponent's side, from your opponent's board.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. It's kind of like it can destroy anything and do a good job of it. It could destroy something of your opponent's and draw you some cards sometimes, which is amazing. That's the best case scenario. But worst case, you can just like use it as Disciple of Bolas or like Altar's Reap or something like that, and just recycle one of your creatures on the board. So that's pretty good for one of the commanders we're going to be talking about soon too.
All right, and next on our list, Sylvan Reclamation. This card, as soon as I saw it, I was like, this is a commander staple. I don't know even how much there is to say about this card, because we already have similar cards, right, Tomer, that are pretty much commander staples?
The biggest comparison to this would be a white staple called Return to Dust, which does essentially the same thing. It can exile up to 2 target artifacts or enchantments for 4 mana. However, you can only exile up to 2 of them if you cast it on your main phase. If you cast it at instant speed at any other phase, then you can only exile 1 of them. So it lines up very well to Return to Dust, which is widely considered a white staple in Commander and is heavily played. So for 1 more mana, you get the ability to exile 2 artifacts and or enchantments at any time without any stipulations of being on the main phase or not. And you get basic land cycling as a cherry on top. So this is actually really well budgeted, and it compares very favorably to a staple. So I can't see why you wouldn't want to at least consider this for any deck that can run it.
Yeah, that's where I'm at with Sylvan Reclamation. Basically, if I'm in green and white, essentially this is just one of those foundational cards that's going to be in my deck list because it's really good at doing what it does. Being instant speed all the time gives it a lot more blowout potential that you don't always have with other versions. And we talked about basic land cycling, making cards often costs 2 more. Well, this one only really costs 1 more than Return to Dust, so I think it's one of the most efficiently costed basic land cyclers out of all the basic land cyclers we've talked about. So I think this card will be, it's not flashy, it's not exciting, it won't be expensive, but this is just a card, if you're playing a Selesnya deck, you just automatically put this in your 99.
Yeah, absolutely. This isn't even one where if you get better mana base, then you want to toss it out for something else. This is just good always, regardless of how expensive your deck is.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's one of the best cards from the uncommon and common group, at least, that we've seen for Commander. So, Tomer, that brings us to the end of our common and uncommon breakdown. So, let me ask you, out of the cards we talked about today, which is your personal favorite?
Personal favorite? Orizaba Advocacy. I love the political aspect of it. I love the fact that it works well with +1/+1 decks, group hug decks, defensive decks. It's just really fun. It's fun, and the designers of this card knew exactly how people are going to use it, and I feel like it's going to do its job very well and efficiently.
I'm going to go with Ash Barrens because I have a love-hate relationship with Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, and seeing an upgrade on those cards is really exciting. There's some times where, I mean, those cards are necessary when you play on a budget, but then they come into play tapped when you really need that 1 extra mana. Ash Barrens takes care of that problem, so even though it's not really flashy, I think that's the card I'm most excited about out of this group.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be nice to have the option of maybe leaving out Terramorphic Expanse and Evolving Wilds for once for an upgrade. It's gonna, or you just run all 3. Probably that's going to be more likely the case for me.
Well, Tomer, thanks for hanging out and doing this. Thanks for hanging out all week and talking Commander 2016. It's been a blast.
Oh, dude, this is my favorite time of year. This is like my Christmas.
Oh, it's Christmas for Tomer. Well, thanks to everyone for watching. Thanks again to Tomer for hanging out, and we will talk to you soon.